Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You're listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and it's a special guest episode because it is only our second two-time guest. Those of you who've been listening to the show for quite some time, you might remember that Mary Lou Tyler, who is the co-author of Predictor Revenue and Predictable Prospecting, was our first two-time guest here on the show. And today we have Steve Benson. Steve is the founder and CEO of Badger Maps. Badger Maps is the number one route planner for field salespeople. Field salespeople meaning outside salespeople. So you're probably thinking to yourself already, why is he having somebody on the show talking about outside sales? Because you can't do that right now. Well, it turns out you can in some places, and Steve's got some really good data around outside sales. And most importantly, and the whole purpose of our conversation today was talking about the shifts that you as a sales leader can be making and the shifts that your sales teams can be making, whether you are truly 100% or 90% outside sales, or in most likely the case, you've got some hybrid model that you were using prior to the coronavirus and COVID shutdown. Chances are you probably had some combination of inside sales plus outside, meaning go to conferences at a minimum, plus traveling to large accounts to do presentations, or traveling to a city or two to meet with a number of prospects and customers over the course of a couple of days' time. And so Steve and his company, Badger Maps, that's the world that they live in, is outside sales, field salespeople. And so Steve pinged me on email and said, look, I've been doing a round of interviews on different podcasts and thought it'd be, wanted to share some of the learnings and some of the topics that I've been sharing with other folks. So I said, dude, let's do it. So little background on Steve. He received an MBA from Stanford. He was at Google for some time. And at Google, he became Google Enterprise's top sales executive globally back in 2009. So the dude knows sales. In 2012, he founded Badger Maps to help field salespeople be more successful by optimizing the routes and schedules. It helps them save more time, be on time so they can sell more. It's an efficiency app, which in the course of our conversation, we talked about how he has had to shift his messaging in today's times. And we spent some time talking about the importance of that for you and your company. Finally, Steve also hosts his own podcast called the Outside Sales Talk podcast, where he interviews industry experts on their top sales tips. And he is the president of the Sales Hall of Fame. So Steve is a guy that just does sales, lives and breathes it every single day. He's also a startup founder, so he knows that world and your world because he's doing it just like you. And so a couple of the main topics, so you know what to listen for. We start off the conversation, first of all, just asking him, how is he going through this process of getting onto podcasts and shows? So one of the things that we're always pushing our clients to do is to leverage their authority voice. So you know more about your market and the problem that you solve than probably pretty much anybody in the world. And so we're always pushing our clients to do things like webinars and be speakers at conferences and virtual events, be guests on podcasts, publishing white papers, publishing books. So there's a way for you to be using your authority voice as a way to get the message out about the problem you solve, help your customers think about how they should be thinking about the problem that they have in front of them. And then, of course, positioning yourself as the solution to that problem. And so Steve's done a really nice job over the years of getting on shows like ours, talking about the market and using that as legitimate lead generation and branding for him and his company. And so I just asked him to share a little bit about how he does that. And I think there's some useful tips for you if you're a startup founder, sales leader at a startup, some tips for you to get out there and make this a sort of priority in your regular marketing and sales cadence. So that was topic number one. Spent about 10 minutes on that. From there, we shifted into how to think through the whole process of outside sales right now, or field sales, as he calls it. Because right now, obviously, we're in a world that things had shut down, where a lot of people thought the temporary was going to be temporary. And now maybe the temporary is becoming a lot more permanent in terms of a lot less travel, conferences being unavailable, unable to go out there and talk and meet with clients. And so we had a good long conversation, probably about 20 or 25 minutes, just digging into how do we make adjustments in this world where you cannot go out to a customer and do the walk the halls or do the big presentation or talk about and talk about implementation or meet with some of the people on the back stage of their company, like people in procurement or folks in the risk department or people in IT, all of which you're going to need involved in your sales process in order to execute through on that sale to get that conversion. And so we dove deep into that conversation, including how to leverage your product champion in new ways that you're probably not doing now and you should be doing. So we got really, really specific on how to think through and how to build what we called an account map. And then finally, the last couple of topics we talked about were as a sales leader, whether you're a CEO leading a sales team, you're a sales VP, a sales leader, you've got a team of reps around you. Like, how do you think about motivation? How do you manage your team? How do you deal with the reality of more aggressive procurement departments, tighter budgets, longer sales cycles? And the question that we asked and answered here on the podcast in this interview was like, what should you be doing as a sales leader to keep your reps sharper? And how do you think about the messaging that you're doing? How do you do an assessment? And ultimately, we talked about the difference between lagging sales indicators, such as revenue, meaning that you only see revenue after the sale is completed. And how do we shift our focus as sales leaders to more leading indicators so that we can get more visibility as to progress that's being made along the sales process prior to hitting that lagging indicator of sales and revenue. We also talked about why you should not be discounting and what you could be doing instead of discounting your price, and how to shift the structure of compensation plans for your sales team so that it's in better alignment with where you and your company need to go from a profitability standpoint versus simply on a revenue standpoint. Don't worry, if you're a salesperson listening to this, we're not talking about lowering your total comp. We're talking about shifting the way you're getting comped. You're still going to make the same OTE, not to worry. Okay, so a little side note to the sales reps listening here. So that's it. That's the show that you've got ahead of you. So like I said, 3 main topics there. I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation. I sure did. Glad we have Steve back on the show. And let's head over to my conversation with Steve Benson. Steven Benson, welcome to the Startup Selling Show. How are you?
Outstanding. Thanks for having me.
Dude, you have the honor of being only the second time guest here on our show. Mary Lou Tyler was our first second time guest, and you are our second time guest. So it's good to have you back.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm in good company. I'll talk about all new things, I promise.
Oh, that's cool. Well, first of all, before we get into a couple of topics, for people that don't know you or don't know your company, what's that sort of 30-second bio or pitch or description of what you do and what problem your company solves, just to give people some context as to everything else we're going to talk about in the next little while?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Steve Benson. I'm CEO of Badger Maps. And what Badger Maps does is helps field salespeople sell more by giving them their customer data and information about their customers. So whether it's from a CRM or a spreadsheet or wherever that might be, we take that data and connect with the CRM and then put it on a map for them. And once they have their information in a map-based environment on their mobile device, they can do things like design their day, build a route, focus on the right people better given where they're going to be, and just helps them get more meetings with customers, and they're the best customers. They're going to have the highest chance of turning into deals. And we do that with a bunch of technology and tools that we've built over the years specifically for field or outside salespeople.
Cool. So I know a bunch of people listening are probably like, okay, we're going to talk about field sales. Wait a second. I'm like, what would be the purpose of that right now? Do you want to start with some of the topics around sales management, like what to do in a field sales environment now, all the reasons that we're talking today. The fact that I said like you're a 2-time guest here on the show, it speaks a lot to your individual process. Like you had emailed me, like we've known each other now for a couple of years since the first time you joined the show. And you just emailed me and said, hey, listen, like I'm, been doing some interviews and talking to people about these topics. And you gave me a nice list of bullet points, action, that startup sales leaders need to take in the current environment. And I was just kind of curious, like I don't see as many startup CEOs like taking that step and getting out there. And I'd love to just, if you wouldn't mind, just as like a little behind the scenes backstage look as to like, why do you do that? And how does that work? And what have been some of the benefits for you getting out there and doing these kinds of conversations with people like me?
I think for a couple of reasons. I mean, good PR and just good getting the word out that you exist and being top of mind with people is always great. And I think that often the leaders of a company and in particular the CEO just they're well positioned to do that. And the things that I'm talking to people about in general aren't necessarily germane to Badger. Like it's more about field sales in general, or how to lead a sales team in a down economy, or a challenging or unstable economy. How you should change your activities. The things that I'm talking about are more to bring tangible value to the type of listener that also purchases my product, field salespeople. But I think that it's really helpful to just get the word out there and be helpful to the world in general. Like, I kind of have a theory that, a philosophy, I guess, that you get to keep about a tenth of the value you create in the world, right? So if as a CEO you go out and you tell a bunch of people a bunch of things that help their business, and you create a bunch of value, some of that'll end up coming back to you, and about a tenth maybe. But I guess that's why I love going on podcasts. I love writing articles about different topics that are helpful to people. I've got my own podcast that is specifically for outside salespeople, and I do all these things because I feel like it's a great way to get in front of a whole bunch of people. And obviously, like, some people end up finding out about Badger Maps, or being reminded that it exists and actually getting around to buying it. But I guess so, it's part hobby and part because I just like, if I can share things that are useful, I want to do it. And part, it does come back and it's good PR. So
Yeah.
I would say any CEO or business leader should be doing this sort of thing. Like, they should be looking for PR opportunities and places where they can get some useful message out to the world and get good at that message. I'm not the greatest sales leader or manager in the world, right? But I researched and wrote some articles, and I've taught some classes, and so there are these. I've got 15 things that I can talk about intelligently, and just from researching over time. And so I try to bring that to people.
Yeah, and you've obviously got domain expertise, and that's something we always share with our clients. For example, we say, look, we talk about it as an authority voice strategy, like going out there and leading your market and teaching your market about their problem and helping them understand ways to think about the problem. Your product aside, a lot of people, especially when it's new technology, they don't necessarily know how to think about how to solve that problem in a new way. They maybe just solve it the old way, whether that's with spreadsheets or, in your case, like literally getting a map out and trying to like map that onto Google Maps versus the new technology that you offer to people. And so, like, one follow-up question before we get into kind of the real meat of our conversation, because I've had other startup CEOs, like, for example, not long ago we had Jim Benton, who's the CEO of our Chorus, and he does a good job of getting out there as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people would wonder, like, how do you make time for this? You're running a tech company, running a startup, you're running a company that's growing. You've got your team, and you've got to deal with the global market volatility, and you've got investors and all the other stuff, customers that you're dealing with every day. This is like, you're spending this time here with me, which means you're not spending this time doing something else, let alone all the personal stuff that you're probably trying to balance. So, like, how do you think about making time for this and making this a priority when when we all know you've got all this other stuff going on?
I mean, I think, you just have to think about what are my priorities right now? What's the most important thing for me to do? And I consider getting the word out that we exist, and that we solve XYZ problems. I find that to be a really high value thing for me to do with a lot of leverage, right? Like, in general, I think it's a worthy activity, and you should be prioritized as such. It's one of these, like, important but not urgent activities in the Eisenhower matrix, right? Like, everyone knows they should do more marketing. Everyone knows they should do more PR. But I mean, we all have the same number of hours a day in our day as Abe Lincoln or Mother Teresa, right? Like, these people that just got tremendous things done in their lives. And running a software startup is hard, but there are harder jobs, and I think it's just we get done what we prioritize to get done.
I like that. Cool. Well, I appreciate that. Well, I know that wasn't one of the topics that we had planned to talk about. I just was struck by the fact that you like followed up with me and said, "Hey, like, here's some topics," and it was easy for me to like, "Oh yeah, dude, let's hop on a call. Let's put you to the top of the list here and get you on the show," because I know that the first time we talked, it was hugely valuable for people listening, and I think it's just an opportunity for a lot of people just like you to get out there and do something simple like this and one other thing that I want to make sure gets captured in what you said earlier, you talked about the message, and just like every time you have to go out there and talk about the company, I always think of it as like, how do I practice for the next one? So every time you're on a show and you have to explain what you do and how you do it and why it's important, it's just another rep. It's another repetition, just like, practicing free throws or any other sort of activity. It's just one more repetition in voicing that value proposition and who you help and why you help them.
Yeah, you absolutely get better and better at it. And I guess one thing that I would try to impress upon people is it doesn't have to be about your product, right? Like I think a lot of CEOs of software companies or leaders in general are like, yeah, the thing that we do isn't that exciting. Like people wouldn't want to hear about the thing that we do. Like, we just make blah, blah, blah more efficient or better, or, we do this, we make this 4 times faster, or whatever the thing is that, software, often doesn't change the world. It just makes some element of it a little better off. And so, but it's often not that exciting. That's not the thing you have to talk about, right? Like none of my talking points are like, let me describe to you the features of Badger Maps and how it helps salespeople. It's like most of them are about different elements and strategies and tactics that sales leaders could or should take or need to take in a time of a recession. And so it really has nothing to do with my product or service at all. But as long as you like have some great thoughts that you've researched and figured out, and they're valuable to listeners, especially if those listeners also happen to be your buyers sometimes, then that can be a great PR and strategy in general.
Cool, man. Well, thanks for sharing a little bit of the backstage. I appreciate it. So let's talk about field sales a little bit. And the context, like you used the phrase field sales, and my vernacular, I always think of it as outside sales. And that is
same thing.
Yeah. And so just for like context, like when people hear us talking about field sales or outside sales, how do you describe that to somebody who isn't quite clear as to what that means? And then we can get into some of the strategies that we want to talk through.
Outside sales or field sales, I think, is any time where you are meeting customers face to face, knee to knee. You're traveling to them and sitting down with them to show them a product or to build a relationship, to demonstrate the product to them, to meet with the decision makers, but you are meeting them face to face, knee to knee. The reason that group of people is important to me is that's the group of people we've built software for to help them organize their time. Yes, that's how I define it. And
Okay.
but there is a spectrum though. Some people do that sometimes, and I guess very few people are always meeting people face to face. Almost anyone would sometimes be doing Zoom calls or regular phone calls or et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the things I was doing in preparation for our conversation, Steve, was just sort of thinking about, okay, there's inside sales and outside sales, but that almost is too simplistic. It almost like bifurcates the idea of like field sales and non-field sales. And I was going back through my experience as a salesperson or working at different companies. And I kind of thought about it almost like and there's probably other ways to think about it, but just to keep it simple, I kind of thought about it in 4 parts or 4 combinations of field sales versus non-field sales. So just for kind of like giving people a rubric in their head, there's like purely inside sales. Like your inside sales, you don't ever travel, maybe occasionally to a conference or something like that, but it's like phone sales and that's it. That's all you do. It's 100% or 99% on the phone. Then the next layer out from there would be inside sales, and then some travel. Like you might go to a couple conferences per year, or if it's a big account, you'll fly out there and do the big meeting with the key executives. So it's probably, 80, 90% inside with some outside as a component to what you're doing. And I did a lot of that when I was selling at Blend, for example, or Altos Research, both startups, and mostly phone stuff. And most of the phone stuff was really just designed to set up the meetings at the conference, or to set up, the big meetings we were going to have on site, or if I was going to go to New York for a couple of days, setting up that, 10 meetings in 2 days where I'm going to rip through Wall Street and meet all the people I need to meet with. So there's sort of that hybrid model. Then the next layer out I was thinking about is like flipping that model I just described, where it's maybe 80% inside, 20% outside, where it's like 20% inside, 80% outside. So I worked at CoreLogic And there were these national account managers that used to handle accounts like Bank of America and Wells Fargo. And they had offices in the corporate office, and they were there like maybe a day a week, or they'd be there for 1 week and then they'd be traveling for 2 weeks, mostly
Absolutely.
outside because they had to spend lots of time at these big accounts with some inside component. And then the last part would be, almost exclusively outside. So those are your like pharmaceutical sales. I used to be a
Hmm.
textbook publishing rep. So I used to like work for Prentice Hall, go knocking
Hmm.
on university professor doors. And I was on campus pretty much every day, all day, 9 to 5, throughout the selling season. So it was like pure outside. So would you just for modeling context, those are kind of the three of the four types I just described have some component of outside.
Yeah, I would say that's a great way to look at it. I think it's a spectrum, and you could be 0% outside or 100% outside, and most roles are going to fall somewhere in between.
All right, we are off and running in my conversation with Steve Benson, founder and CEO of Badger Maps. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Listen, one of the things I really appreciate it, if you could do this for me, is right now, this very moment, leave a review for us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, wherever you happen to be listening to this show. Look, you can even send me an email at Scott, SCOTT, at salesqualia.com, sales, QUALIA.com. Let us know how we're doing. How do you like the show? What can we do to improve? How can we make it even better? We take those reviews really seriously. It's one of the best ways for other people just like you to find the show. And while you're at it, maybe tell a friend or 10 about what we're doing here at the Startup Selling Show. It's one of my favorite things to do each and every week is to bring people like Steve onto our show, talk shop, talk sales, give you tactical tips that you can put into motion right away. It's a way for me to geek out and just kind of jam on sales. So that's it. That's my one ask of you is to go ahead and leave a review. And I guess if I had a second ask, it would be to tell a friend or 10. So that's it for now. Let's head back to my conversation with Steve Benson. So thinking about it that way, we know that like 3 of those 4 situations are situations where there was some component of field sales or more
Mhm.
than some. And so that
Yeah.
brings us to, okay, so you're an expert in field sales. You work with field sales people every day at Badger Maps. And yet now we're in this world today where there really aren't any outbound sales. And they're used to people, I think in March, April, May, were thinking, okay, by September, we'll get back to normal. And kind of by Q4, I'll be able to, start traveling again. And it appears that the temporary is becoming more and more permanent. So how do you think through, or how should companies that have at least some component of outside be thinking through like this new normal or this new permanent? What are some ways that you're seeing companies
Y-
are adjusting quickly to this new way of doing business?
Well, I mean, I think, there are just certain products and services that you're better off selling face to face. Things that cost a certain amount or require a certain amount of trust or faith in something, things that are relationship based and industries that are competitive. Getting face to face shortens sales cycles, it deepens relationships, and there's often a very good reason. It's often worth the sales rep's time to go to the client. But yeah, in this world, I think that's become more difficult. We've seen across our customer base about a 30%, and we can see how many meetings are occurring in person, right? Because that's one of the things that people use us to track is and like capture data about the meetings, right? So we can see how many are happening. And at this point, it's people listening at other times. It's now July, and in February we're about 30% down in terms of meetings occurring. So
Only 30%.
yeah, a lot of industries are essential. I mean, and a lot of
Ah,
our customers are in essential industries, and I think there's big quotes around essential at this point. Obviously, like bars aren't essential, but pretty much everything else is. So, like, if you ask someone, "Is your business essential?" They're like, "Yes, absolutely,"
well,
because
depending
if
on
things
the
weren't
state, it appears like bars and gyms are essential.
right.
So
Exactly. I mean,
that I just want to like comment there. That surprises me that it's. I mean, 30% is a big drop. I would have expected you to say 80%, 90%.
well, I think in software, it probably is. I think with the industry that we're in, I think we were very good at working from home, and we're all tech savvy, and it wasn't that big of an impact for businesses of this nature to shift to working from home. And I think, a lot of the people that were doing what you were doing, flying to New York for 10 meetings in 2 days with Wall Street, I think that hybrid rep is often just doing those meetings over the phone now or over Zoom.
Hmm.
But that's not the case in a lot of industries. Like if you sell medical devices to dentists, you're still going to the dentist's office right now. You haven't
Okay.
shifted to Zoom meetings. If you're selling tires to tire stores, you're still going to the tire store. You're just wearing a mask. So I think they've different industries have adjusted in different ways, and it's probably about the customer and how well they're going to react to that. And you know, I think for a lot of industries, it's really hard to replicate the connection that you have in person, and the over Zoom or over the phone. It's just you don't get that same connection, and it can be clunky, it can be awkward. It's harder to understand the customer and their problems because you lose that honest eye to eye social interaction, which I think people thrive on. And you tap in, humans connect in a certain way, and it's really hard to create a long lasting relationship if you've just met someone over the phone. If you haven't, if you're selling someone something expensive, you often need to take them out to dinner and stuff, right? Like it's a way
Sure.
humans break bread, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I remember when I was at Blend, our first big meeting, like our first introductory meeting with Wells Fargo was, a quick 30-minute sit down in a conference room with the head of lending. And that went really well. It was the head of lending, our CEO at Blend, a guy named Nima, and me. And the guy, the SVP of lending, happened to be he was in San Francisco traveling from Des Moines. And we just said, oh, by the way, we have no idea if you have any dinner plans, but, would you want to go out and grab a bite? And he's like, yeah, actually, I don't have anything going on tonight. Sure. And I was like, oh, awesome. And that led to a much deeper conversation, over 2 hours in dinner, where it was just like, it felt like a much more real, like the 30 minutes we had was very useful. And of course, very different when you get into that dinner scenario, which we could just get more in, like, understand deeper, his philosophy around technology and understanding more about his team. By the end of the dinner, I remember him saying, okay, well, geez, we're going to have to get this person involved. And they tend to be a little bit more averse to change. And this person over here, like, they could be really helpful. And he was almost like mapping out the account for us, which was going to
Hmm.
take 18 months for us to even convert anyway. But that one step from the 30-minute meeting into a dinner led to what I feel like set the whole tone for the rest of the next 12 to 18 months before we even got the first user on board.
Yeah, I have had a belief for a long time, and I started my career in field sales and software. I think that the trend in software has been towards inside sales, and I think we in the software industry more than any other industry overdo inside sales and undervalue that face-to-face interaction. And I think it's because technical people control this industry for the most part, and they just tend to value those sorts of things a little less. Like the industry skews younger, the industry skews more tech savvy, obviously, but also just if you like there are a lot of industries that if you tell people, yeah, I try to sell over the phone, they're just like, we would get no business if we did. We would, our
Right.
revenue would cut in half. Our competitor would just eat our lunch. Like
Yeah.
we have
Well,
to get
and that's why we had a major account reps when I was at CoreLogic that, you're assigned to Bank of America, you're assigned to Chase, and you're assigned to Wells Fargo. And those people knew running those accounts, I'm going to have to fly to Des Moines and hang out there for 3 or 4 days, walk the
Mhm.
halls, jam in new meetings that I didn't fly out there for certain meetings. I maybe had 3 or 4 meetings booked, but I'm going to be there for 3 days. Those 3 or 4 meetings I know could lead to 10 more because the first meeting leads to introduction to somebody else internally. And to your point, like, this software is really complex. So I want to get into some strategies here around, like, how do we bridge the gap now? If in a software world, like, I'll use my experience at Blend again, like, that first conversation was great. And we had, who knows how many other meetings, a combination of phone, web meetings, and on site. I mean, we had to fly to Des Moines several times. Our CEO flew to Des Moines for one meeting in one day. And, like, that was the thing when he had to do. Not to mention, when it comes time for implementation, we had sales engineers that had to go on site and make sure that you're working with their teams. And a lot of that is more difficult. So what strategies are you recommending or seeing people do in places where they have to do either fewer face-to-face visits or they just can't do those face-to-face visits? Like, how do we bridge that gap?
Well, I think, this is a tough time. I mean, you're in this respect, a lot of your customers just aren't in the office anymore. So it really just depends industry to industry. If you are in a situation where normally you would have gone and met at Bank of America, the Bank of America building is just closed, it's just harder to get deals done. This extends sales cycles to not be able to get face to face. Not to mention, sales cycles are extended because people are just tighter with the purse strings right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's an uncertain time. I guess I would recommend the sales change that you need to make, if given that you can't get in front of people as well, you don't have the relationships in place with all the people internally you need. You can't just kind of, go to Des Moines and meet with these people, and then that leads to these meetings, which leads to these meetings, which really can move a sales cycle through quickly. You can talk to the right people, get things done. I think that the strategy is that you have to leverage your sponsor more. So the person who sees the value in your product already knows how to navigate the organization to get things done. I think that the play is to lean on them more, to have them, the way you were talking about how when you met the person in person, they helped you map out the account and figure out who would need to be involved. You're going to need to have the person who wants the thing that do that and do better than you ever would have before, because it's not going to happen naturally, right? Like it's got to be, you've got to force things a little more. Things are going to be it's a little more awkward now, almost. It's like clunkier. But that person that knows the organization and works in the organization and can get to the right people and knows, and they'll take his meeting because he's a coworker. Like, you need to arm him or her to have the ability to basically sell the product for you. And they won't necessarily be able to get you in on all these meetings because you're not walking the halls with them. And I've had that happen a million times in sales cycles where you're talking to your sponsor and they're like, let's just go down the hall to John's office and let's just chat with him while you're here.
Right.
I want him to hear what you're saying right now about this. Instead, he's going to call John and talk about the ROI of this. You need to have armed him with a deep understanding, and you have to walk him through the spreadsheets and give them to him about how to prove out what the ROI is going to be of this investment, for example.
Yeah, I like this a lot. And I think, like, I'm imagining if I'm a salesperson or I'm a sales manager, like, we're always looking for that champion or that sponsor on the inside. And to your point, I think it's easy to, when you've got more opportunities to do outside meetings or even meet somebody at a conference and they can bring their colleagues along for that 30-minute coffee. You don't have that. And so almost being like, if I was a manager, I would want to tell my reps, like, look, once you have the sponsor, like, let's add a step in our process, in our sales playbook, and call it like the plan meeting or the playbook meeting of some kind, and like literally sit down over Zoom, sit down with that sponsor and say, okay, look, like, in our experience in the past, back in January or back in 2019, this is how we would typically go through a sales process with a company like yours. We'd come on site and do a meeting with these people in the demo. And then after the demo, we'd probably want to meet with the IT people and the risk people and the procurement people. And those meetings would happen on site because they would ask these or that questions. And we can't do those now. So in order for us to like get this thing through from where we are to a sale for you guys using it, we're going to have to figure out a way to replicate this. So how do we do that? And almost like I would make that a step in the process and like map this out and like give assignments, like almost like a sprint planning meeting. Okay, who's responsible for what kind of thing?
And remember, your customer doesn't know how to sell your product and isn't a professional salesperson and doesn't really know how to sell anything, right? Like, your sponsor may not think about things in terms of, this is the checklist or set of things that need to get done to get a deal done. Like, people that object to it need to be, those objections need to be overcome and shown why they're incorrect or, outdated or closed-minded or whatever. Like, you have to find the people that disagree with this being done and neutralize them. You need to get legal to sign off. You need to get, there's the the people with the purse strings, they have to open up the purse strings.
Right.
This needs to be proven to be compatible with this element of your existing technology stack. Like all these, as a salesperson, what needs to happen to get a deal done. And there's several, there are a bunch of things that kind of maybe have happened naturally in the past that are going to need to be forced until we can get back into outside sales. And you have to think through those things that maybe you've been taking for granted and make sure you take the steps. And some things are just trickier too. Like if you're in the meeting and you can read the body language of the person that is running this element of the other technology that you're going to have to integrate with to get your technology put in place at a company, you can tell that person has an objection. You can elicit that objection. You can bring it up. You can guess what it's going to be and start the conversation about it. And then you can overcome it. But now you kind of need to train your sponsor to go to that person on the side, like, hey, are you concerned about this at all? I wanted to talk to you about it. Like these guys are telling me. Oh yeah, it looks like actually they can handle that integration or whatever it is, right? But you've got to be a little more thoughtful about it. And I think that not to mention when times are good, things are just easier, right? When people are just looser with purse strings, they're willing to take risks. They're just, and so I think it's a little bit of an uphill battle right now, and it makes it a little more difficult, or a lot more difficult in some cases. By being more thoughtful and having a tighter plan, you can overcome things and still get the deal done.
Yeah, I was just, as you were sharing those thoughts, Steve, I just wrote down 3 words, which is control, accountability, and leadership. So when I'm thinking that from the standpoint of the seller, and you're saying like you're in this situation where, maybe you could go to a conference and gather people around a coffee. Maybe you could go on site and walk the halls. You can't do those things now. So it's our responsibility to say, look, I can't just like do the pitch and then send the recording to the sponsor and hope that they can get everybody else on board. Like we shouldn't be doing that anyway. Of course, in any environment, but it's even more acute in a situation like this.
Absolutely. And
I always look at it and say, like putting together that plan. I was putting together that plan and identifying, okay, Mary in IT and Rick who runs risk and Bill over in security, like sitting down as part of that planning with the champion and saying, okay, well, when we talk to people like Mary, these are some of the questions that they ask. These are some of the concerns that they have. How do you think she's thinking about this? Like you got to like really get in there and be willing to take control and be accountable and take a leadership role in the sale. Because if you don't, it's just not going to happen.
And things, you do have to do things differently, right? Like you need to approach certain people in a different way when times are tough, when the purse strings are tighter. One thing that I just did with my team is we shifted the messaging from the marketing team and to some degree the sales team as well, the messaging of what value we bring to the customer, right? And I think everyone should reevaluate their messaging because what really resonated with one of your customers or prospects, in February might be different now. And I think the key there is a lot of software companies and a lot of companies in general, their messaging is, we're going to help you do better. Like we're going to, help you sell more. We're going to help you save more. We're going to use less of this. Like whatever it is, the messaging is basically, you'll be a little better off after you buy our stuff. And then I think what that message maybe falls a little flat in times of an economy that is unstable and where people's revenues are sliding and when you're in a recession, basically. I think you might want to consider shifting that will help you do better messaging that you see at the top of your website to will help you do more with less. And then you have to the sales team needs to go about showing your prospects how much in terms of actual dollars that you'll help them do more with less. It could be less money, it could be less manpower, could be less resources. But I think that shift in messaging can be really effective in an economy like this. You have to reevaluate the way you're doing it. I mean, the way we did it, my messaging has always been that classic, like, I'll help you do better. My messaging has always been, we'll we'll help you sell 20% more with your field sales team. Like that's what the top of the website said. And we changed it to, with Badger Maps, your outside sales team can generate the same revenue as they were, even though your team is 20% smaller now.
Ah,
And that's subtly different in both cases. But one resonates way more with your prospects in this
sure.
economy.
Because
So
everybody has made cuts, right? Everybody, not everyone. I mean, I
yeah.
don't like absolutes, but a lot of companies have cut back on salespeople,
Hmm.
and they're looking to do more with less, or maybe not even more, but do the same that they were
Hmm.
doing with less.
or
Like, is
or
that
maybe they have the same number of people, but it's just sales cycles are that much harder to close, and
mm,
so everyone's revenue is kind of sliding a little, or sales cycles are longer, or it's just you want to change your messaging. We've been in a time of abundance, and now we're in a time of starvation. So it's you may want to look at the top of your website to make sure it reflects that, and it can, even though you're effectively saying the same thing, and your product does the same thing, it resonates differently. It'll land
yeah?
differently.
Well, it's an interesting concept and it's an important one because, like, behaviorally, as a salesperson, we should always, and I've heard this from different people, including Mary Lou Tyler, who I referenced earlier. She's always talked about you need to enter the conversation at the place where your prospect is. Like wherever they're thinking, that's where you need to enter the sales conversation. So if right now they're not thinking, how do I do, 20% growth, or how do I do better? Instead, they're thinking every day, how do I like get back to even? Or how do I get more out of this team that's smaller? Or how do I deal with longer? The other thing is sort of more aspirational versus like the real time. This is the thing I'm thinking about each and every day coming out. And even further, like the whole, one of the reasons we were talking about earlier is like a lot of people thought, okay, like back in March and April into May, like, okay, the shutdown thing, at some point it's going to resolve. We'll be back to normal in September, October. And now there's this new kind of normal that's emerged. And so what was maybe a previously temporary perceived problem, like, oh, I got to figure out how to do a little bit more with less. But eventually I'll be able to hire again. Eventually I'll be able to get back to conferences, eventually be able to start traveling again. Now this reality in July or August, it's like, crap, like schools are going to be closed. People aren't going to be traveling. Like people might not even be in their office anymore. They might be giving them up altogether. So now I got to figure out a whole new way of doing business. So your shift in your messaging isn't just a temporary thing. It may be a more permanent thing for the next couple of years until we figure out that
Yeah,
next.
yeah, it could definitely be longer, and I think a recession changes a lot of things, right? I mean, it changes how your competitors act. Your competitors could be, and this is for your prospects and for your company. If you have desperate competitors doing desperate things, and they're just willing to do things they weren't willing to do before, it can put pressure on your margins, right? They can deeply discount. They can look to liquidate inventory just to make ends meet. They can give away free things like free consulting, or just basically enrich their offering in ways that they wouldn't have if times were good, in order to steal market share from you. And your customers have customers too, right? Like your customers are behaving differently, their customers are behaving differently, and this is how recessions and depressions work: is everyone shifts their behavior a little bit, and it ripples through. Everyone, if everyone's facing resistance to getting sales done, and your prospects aren't engaging the same way, and they don't want to meet in person, and they have an excuse not to get things done now, and everyone has the best excuse in the world to fail at this point, right? It's not my fault. It's the way the world is. But I think a lot of people are running into spending freezes, and a lot of people are also running into aggressive procurement departments, right? Like they're
Mhm.
who are just wringing the margins out a little bit, and just jamming your margins down, and asking for better terms and other things. It's just everyone's kind of running into the same challenges, and so we need to react to those challenges. You've got, if your reps are bumping their heads against that, you get them negotiation training, right? You prepare them for these conversations. You help them sharpen their swords. And we're coming from a place where we were fat and happy, for the last 10 years, and now we've got to get leaner and meaner and more aggressive.
Yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, you brought up a couple of good topics there, Steve. Like thinking about, whether you call it a down economy, unstable, volatile, uncertain, whatever it is, it's just like life is different and
Hmm.
buying behavior is different. Budgets are tighter, procurement teams are more aggressive, using your word there. And we've seen this as well with our clients. You're coming to us in our coaching calls and saying, like, what do I do in these situations? And so, what are a couple specific changes that you feel like sales leaders need to make? Imagine a scenario, right? You're now managing people remotely. At least before, maybe you had an inside team doing some outside, right? And at least you could like be in the office every day and work with them and train them and teach them and coach them. Now you can't even do that. Now everybody effectively is an outside salesperson from a sales leader, from a sales
Hmm.
management standpoint, because everybody's working from home. And then your reps are doing their best they can, but they're hitting these headwinds.
Hmm.
So one thing you mentioned is maybe getting them negotiation training. What are some other things that you'd recommend sales leaders do, or what kind of behavioral changes do leaders need to do in this kind of time of uncertainty to make sure the revenue keeps flowing?
Yeah, well, an economic crisis is probably the hardest time to be a sales leader, and this one especially because of the way it's basically hobbling a lot of sales teams with the restrictions, and salespeople interact with people, and that interaction is restricted. But the whole company still depends on revenue, and the revenue that the sales team produces is what everyone's actually, that's what we all eat on. So we need, I think this is a time when sales leaders do need to really step up and make some changes to be successful, right? I mean, they have to confront reality and be action oriented, give an honest assessment of what the challenges are that are facing the organization. What are the headwinds? How can we confront them head on? You have to stay positive. They need to be more positive and keep the team moving in the right direction, be more responsive. Like, it may be responsive in different ways than they've had to before, right? If your team was all in the bullpen and were able to walk around and sit down with them and pull them into your office for quick coaching sessions, like you need to be able to replicate that in the new world, and you have to still support and train your reps. If anything, they need more guidance and more coaching in these tough times. And it's maybe something, a lot of reps are younger. They haven't seen this kind of thing before. Maybe some of them are older and they have seen recessions before, but no one's seen one like this exactly in our lifetime. I'm not optimistic about where things are going right now either. I think that, we're not, happiness and frolicking in meadows is not just around the corner from my perspective. And I think that it's going to stay a scary time, and reps are going to be worried about their jobs and their futures and their careers, and they still get their base salary, but they're almost everyone's commissions are. I mean, probably not if you're a Zoom sales rep, but for most companies, reps commissions are compressed, and commissions checks are what people are paying their mortgage with, right? The base won't get them there, so a lot of sales reps are making a lot less money than they were.
So what
Um,
are, if I could, I'd like to jump in and ask, like, as you're talking to sales leaders, your customers that are managing field sales teams or any sales teams, you said things like, make an honest assessment or be more responsive in different ways. Can you think of an example or two of like a specific strategy that you know of that somebody's done when you talk about doing an honest assessment or being responsive?
yeah, from an honest assessment perspective, I mean, you got to look at your numbers, you got to look at your KPIs, and figure out, do we need to, are we looking at the right things? I think in good times especially, it's very easy to just focus on lagging KPIs and revenue. Salespeople, and sales teams, sales leaders, revenue is always the thing they're most focused on, but that's actually a lagging KPI, and it's easy to look at that, especially in times where cash is king. But I think a change you can make in a down economy is you can start looking at and evaluating reps by more forward-looking KPIs, like pipe building, and looking to things that are going to generate revenue in the future. I think a lot of deals are still getting teed up. They're just not going to drop and get sold until things get a little warmer. But you've got to. I kind of envision reps right now, like setting up bowling pins, and
Mm,
setting up layers and layers of bowling pins, and eventually they're going to get to throw a ball down the lane and knock them all down when
yeah.
the economy gets better. But you just got they so you have to look to, okay, who's setting up a lot of bowling pins in the alley right now. and you need to count different things and measure different things. So so identify where you're not doing well, and then confront that head on. So if you're having trouble with pipeline building, or you don't think that people are getting enough things teed up, start counting lead gen type numbers. Like really focus in on forward looking metrics like meetings scheduled, or how many qualified deals you've done, or how many proposals have been written. If it's more middle funnel, how many presentations to the decision makers are occurring.
Oh, I like that one.
Maybe you're having trouble closing, and is it negotiation skills, or is it just people really aren't going to buy until things, until they're able to open back up. Like are you selling the value of what you do even in a down economy, and getting people to the point where they're like, oh, this is important enough that I should do this even today. All these things are more forward looking. And I think, margins are another really important thing. Like a lot of people's margins are compressing, and you want to track discounting on every deal, figure out why we needed that amount of discounting to get there, to get the deal done, and teach your reps how to defend the margin with getting back to value selling skills, negotiation training. So
Dude, I love these. Sorry, go ahead. I think you're about to share something else.
well, that just made me think about you can look to shift the structure of your sales comp plan as a sales leader. Like you were asking, what actions can you take here? And like you see inside, we were talking about margins compressing. If you see your margins compressing, you may want to start behaving, even though you're a software company that should have really great margins, you may want to start doing some things that companies with tighter margins do. And in software in general, or a lot of high margin industries, growth industries, you see reps getting comped on revenue, right? That's pretty much the standard. But you go to a tighter margin industry where there's negotiation at play, reps are often comped on profitability and profit that they bring in. And so you may want to shift the growth mindset that we wish we could still have to we got to protect the margin mindset. And so how do you do that? You change the reps comp plan and make it important to them. So if you're a sales leader, you can, you basically just shift the comp plan from the revenue line to the profit line, right? So if they were getting paid on revenue and they gave a 15% discount, they just lost 15% of their comp, right? If their bonus. But if you shift it to a profitability and you had 30% margins and they gave that same 15% discount, they just lost half of their commission check. So
I can imagine a sales rep listening to this going, no,
shut up, Steve, shut up.
What are you talking about?
But you can gear it so they actually get paid the same, right? Like you make the OTE the same. You're just incentivizing margin defense. And that's better aligned with what the company needs to do right now, because everyone's feeling those purse strings tighten and margins tighten. If your margins have fallen to, from 80% to 30%, then, you just need a lot more deals to get to the same level of profitability. And in that case, we don't all have a bunch more deals right now. If anything, there's fewer deals to get done. So it's really important to defend the margin.
Well, I like the idea of one, it's introducing the rep to look, this is we're running a business here, and whether it's a software product with 30% margin or another industry where margins are thinner, you're saying, look, we got to run the business the right way. We still need to make a profit, and so we can adjust the comp schedule. You're still going to make more. But what this does, I think, it goes back to a phrase that you used earlier, which is enriching the deal. Like you talked about doing competitive analysis and seeing our competitors doing things to keep customers or to get new customers by enriching the deal. That could be including consulting hours or adding on products. And I always feel like if the instinct of the rep, as soon as they get any kind of pushback, is to immediately drop the price, then you've in a lot of ways commoditized the product. So instead, by installing this shift in commission program, then what you basically could do is get the rep to think about it in a more business-like way and say, okay, well, look, gosh, I don't want to just slap 15% discount onto this deal because it's going to kill my proposal. How could it be creative? Maybe I could go talk to, the product team and see if we have some other product we can include as part of this deal would be valuable to the customer. So now for the same price, they're actually getting more as opposed to just spending less for the one product I could be selling. And that could include, we talk about doing strategy sessions. Like, hey, one of the things we'll do with you customers, like every quarter, we'll sit down and do a half-day strategy session with you to show you where our product roadmap is going and get a sense of where your business is and making sure that we're all aligned. Like that's normally a consulting workshop that we charge and put whatever number to it. We usually would charge $5,000 for that consulting session, but we'll throw that in the deal, and you're enriching the value that's getting from the customer, which is better for the customer. And then that way you don't have to necessarily just run to the discount in order to get something done.
Absolutely. And I think we should be looking for ways to create, and a lot of this is stuff that we always should have been doing, but now we have to. So we should be looking for ways to create value for the customers. And I think, to your point, a lot of people's instinct is, to get this deal done, I gotta give a discount, right? Everyone's tightening their purse strings, and so, on the buyer side of your customer, they're just all like, yeah, we should definitely be asking for discounts now when we buy stuff because times are tough, and that's a great excuse. And it's just something that we should have been doing all along, but now we're going to really do it. But I think, I find myself regularly telling so I've made it so like discounting has to be approved by me. And the answer is always no, basically. because that's not what we need to get the deal done. We know that we create 10x the value of our cost for our average customer. So they don't need a 20% discount. They're just asking for the 20% discount. If to get the deal done, you need a 20% discount, then we haven't sold the value right. Because if they understand that they're going to get 10x the value that they pay for this thing, then they don't need the 20% discount.
Yep. So, and totally agree. Dude, this has been great. I'm really glad that we're able to jump back on and have another conversation. We've covered a lot of really great ground. Like number one, we talked about just your process for getting out there and having conversations like this with people like me so we can get the word out, help educate people. We talked about the importance of account mapping and finding your champion, really coaching your champion, working with that champion, all kinds of strategies there. And then we shifted into conversation about what to do in a down economy, uncertain times, whatever you want to call it. And I love this idea of shifting the focus from lagging indicators to leading indicators and really shifting the structure of the comp plan. So it's a lot done in like less than an hour. I really appreciate you reaching out and hopping back on the show here.
Absolutely. It's been fun to be back on, and if I can ever be useful, let me know.
Cool, man. So where can people go to check out Badger Maps and check you out and get in touch?
Yeah, I mean, if it's Badger, if they're in field sales and they want to know about what Badger does for them, I'd say our website's the best place. So badgermapping.com. It's, Badger like the animal, spelled the same way. I went to Wisconsin, so I'm a Badger.
I wondered about that.
But yes, and salespeople are kind of Badgers, aggressive, tenacious. So it was good branding, although it doesn't work that well in like French. But
whenever I hear Badger, I think about the honey badger.
Right. Well, and when I named the company, that was like one of the most popular viral videos of the year.
That video, the honey badger, just don't give up.
Yeah, exactly. It was fantastic. Everyone should go watch that video one more time. We all need a little joy in our lives.
I'll have to put a link to it. Honey badger. We'll put a note in my jaws and do that.
For sure.
The show notes. And then you also mentioned your podcast as well, Outside Sales Talk.
Yeah, Outside Sales Talk. It's a kind of a sales training podcast, sales, learning and philosophizing about sales. It's less talk from me and more me interviewing sales leaders. So I bring sales leaders and coaches and trainers on to kind of authors, stuff like that, to teach their thing that they know the most about, but through the lens of this is for field or outside sales. And that's we've done 100 episodes or so. So it's been a lot of fun and really rewarding. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I'm on the website right now. I can recognize many of the names here. Alice Hyman, you've interviewed. James Harris. I see his name. I see his face. Oh, Richard Harris. That's who it is. Richard Harris. Mm-hmm. So yeah, some great stuff. Good people on here for sure. Mark Roberge. A lot of people know his name from his success.
I've managed to get the hitters to come on. So,
what's that?
I've managed to get a lot of the hitters to come on.
Yeah. So. Sean Finder. We've had Sean Finder on our show over at AutoClose. Great guest, dude. He is like, the amount of ideas per minute was probably among the best of any show interview we've ever done. It was just like he was just it was like a machine gun. I couldn't keep up.
Well, I'll tell you what I do is I look at other podcasts and find out who like had the most shared and viewed episodes that I'll like other podcasts that are sales podcasts. And I'm like, oh, that guy's great. So I want him on my podcast. And so it's kind of how I've cobbled together this group.
You got Jason Bay. So he does coaching in our coaching program. He does all of the outbound prospecting and outbound sales coaching for our clients inside of our coaching program. The guy is phenomenal.
Yeah, that's a good one to listen to.
Yeah, he's great.
One of my favorites to listen to is Joanne Black. She's written like 3 books on referral selling. And so in an hour or 40 minutes or whatever, however long my podcast was, the episode by her, just like, it's like a game changer in your sales. Like if you can approach referrals in the right way, it's just a game changer. And she's written 3 books about it and she just broke it all down. So that's definitely one to listen to.
We'll put a link to that inside our show notes as well. So that way people will be able to click right over to your podcast show. The one person you're missing though, do you know who you're missing?
Who's that?
Dude, you're talking to him.
Hey, you want to come on? That'd be great.
Oh, I would love to. I'm glad you thought of that.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
But we just started doing what you've been doing and getting me on other podcasts. We started getting people asking me to be on other shows earlier this year, just because we've had this show and all the other stuff I do on LinkedIn, and we kind of like, we should probably like get me on more shows since people are asking. So now our marketing team is like, Scott, you got to get on more shows. So
absolutely, it's definitely it's definitely worth doing. It's I think it's a great way to bring if you have a good message, to get it out to the world is really important.
Yeah, cool, man. Well, look, we'll get all of these notes typed up. We'll send them over to you. You can share them. And once we get the episode live, we'll share the link so you can share it with everyone in your world, on your email list or tribe, or however you want to think about it. Really, really appreciate you taking the time. Glad that you reached out, Steve. And hey, maybe we'll have to make you the first 3-time guest at some time soon.
I'm running out of content, but I've got a little.
No, you're not. You got a lot more. I know you do. Well, good, man. Good to talk to you. I know you got to jump. Thanks so much for taking the time. We'll do it again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I will talk to you soon, Scott.
Take it easy, man. Bye.
Bye-bye.